Welcome back to the ABG Investor Days. My name is Johan Brown, a retail analyst here at ABG. We now have the pleasure to welcome Fiskars and CFO Sari Pohjonen to the stage. The floor is yours, Sari.
Thank you, and good morning and welcome also on my behalf. If we could go to the next page in the presentation, please. And Fiskars has a very strong brand portfolio. The brands that you see on the screen right now, they represent just some of our brands, some of the key brands that we work with. But we all in all have more than 3,000 years of brand experience in the company. And the brands that you see here, they represent most of them what we call as key international brands, but I will get back to those in a bit in later part of the presentation. On the next page, you will see our purpose of making the everyday extraordinary. That well also tells about the product categories we play with. It also tells about how we are present in the consumers' lives on a daily basis. Our products are something that the consumer can afford on first of all purchasing for their daily use and also utilizing them from morning to evening in their everyday lives. This is important to bear in mind when you think overall about the Fiskars business, as we are no longer present in product categories that could be considered as being more like investments. We used to, for instance, have a boats business, but that was divested a few years ago. Boats tend to be, at least for the normal consumers, an investment commodity and not something you would be first of all, being able to acquire frequently, or secondly, utilizing it frequently, despite perhaps during a certain part of the year. And therefore also this is important for us as a general guideline when looking into what type of businesses we want to be in. So it's all about making presence in the consumers' lives on a daily basis, but not being at a too luxury position. So most of our brands can be considered either affordable luxury or then they are something where the price points are even more flexible. Looking into the net sales development, if we move on to the next page in the material, this is the split in 2019. In terms of brands, you see the split here. So Fiskars brand is the biggest one for us. And then the other key international brands, which are the next 5 ones mentioned on the slide, they represent 7 to 9% each of the total. So all in all, roughly 75% of our total sales are generated by what we call key international brands. In terms of geographies, you see here the split. It's been fairly stable in the past couple of years, so that Europe is close to 50% of our total. The Americas portion, depending a little bit on the currency rate, is in the ballpark of 40. And then the share of Asia Pacific has been growing in the past years, and we are now, or we were at 13%. Total in 2019. And the Asia Pacific for us covers also Australia, so Japan, Australia, and more recently China, which is one of our key strategic priorities, into which I will come in a bit. Then if we take a closer look at business area Detta, on the next page, please. The key categories there are the tableware, drinkware, and interior. And for business area Detta, as you can see from the graphics on the page here, Q4, so the last quarter always is the most critical in this business. It's about the gifting season, it's about generating a lot of the sales, and also the profitability is geared towards the Q4, as you can see from the graphs. Here we have also mentioned the key brands for this business area. Iittala, Royal Copenhagen, Waterford and Wedgwood are among those. And would be good to mention also that in terms of own retail, which we defined as being both own e-commerce as well as physical retail, own retail covers roughly 1/3 of the business area Viitta. So we have close to 400 different physical retail locations globally, depending a lot on the market structure and how each of the markets are typically structured. And then obviously we are present with e-commerce, with own e-commerce in tens of countries with many of the brands that we operate. And maybe related to this year, one could say that what we have generally seen and what I think everyone has seen in the world, that due to the pandemic situation, it hasn't really changed the trend in terms of digital, but I believe it has hugely accelerated the trend how we see the world shaping up. So e-commerce and digital in general is becoming much more important than what it used to be in the past. And of our business areas, Viitta is the one business area which is directly mostly involved in that. Obviously, the other two business areas have a lot of digital business as well, but we tend to operate with a little bit of a different business model. If we move on to the next page, where we have business area Terra, the key categories here are gardening, outdoor and watering. And you also see the key brands. Fiskars is present globally. Gerber and Gilmore are more on the Americas market, and US being there the biggest one. In terms of gardening, we have done a lot to improve the portfolio in the recent years. And gardening used to be a business where most of the sales were generated in the spring, and then the season was practically over. Yes, the spring season is still very important, but we have also taken a look at the portfolio, that how can we prolong the gardening season so that it wouldn't be a question of the spring only. And we have nowadays in the portfolio, for instance, products where one can say that you will be either harvesting the season in your garden, and then you also in a way close the gardening season. So that has given us new opportunities in the portfolio, and to make sure that we also see the gardening sales not really flattening during the year, but there is more offering available also after the spring. Watering has been in our portfolio for a few years now. It is a category which is heavily dependent on the weather, whether we want it or not, but that is just a fact of life, and it's reality for us. Last year in 2019, if you compare, for instance, the Q3 data on this slide, last year Q3 was heavily impacted by the weather being wet in the US, which meant that the watering category in 2019 was suffering in terms of sales. On the other hand, this year the weather has been more beneficial to us, and that is also partly one reason why the sales development versus the previous year has been positive, as you can see from the slide. Then if we move on to the next page, which is business area Crea, the scissors and creating tools are part of the categories we play with, and we also have cooking. Cooking is mostly present at the moment in the European markets, but scissors and creating tools are more global for us. Here the key brand is Fiskars. We have other brands as well, but predominantly the Crea business is about Fiskars. And as you can see, compared to the two other business areas, Crea sales are more flat in terms of the seasonality. However, within the quarters, there are always important seasons in certain markets. One of them, which I could mention, is the back-to-school season in the US, where the system is a bit different from compared to what we have been used to in Europe. So in the US, the parents are taking care of purchasing to the pupils when they go back to school. They do receive a lot of the equipment from the family side and not necessarily from the offered by the school as we potentially are used to the situation in Europe. Then if we flip on to the next page, you can see here the quarterly development over the last 3 years. I already mentioned that for Vita business, the last quarter is always the most decisive one, and that is reflected in the numbers as well here, especially then in terms of profitability. This year, however, I think we can be very happy with the development during Q2 and Q3. There have been certain challenges related to the pandemic, as I guess every company has been facing this year. But on the other hand, we have taken quite quick measures already during the first quarter, or started to take them during the first quarter, when we noticed in our Asian business that this is something which will remain and will impact us and is not something that will go away very shortly. So we have been implementing a lot of temporary savings this year. There are also permanent savings affecting the situation. We have two transformation type of programs ongoing. Vita transformation, which was started in 2018 and is expected to last until the end of 2021. And more recently, roughly a year ago in December 19, we launched a restructuring program, which is also ongoing and expected to end by 2021. But some of the results are already visible in our numbers. Then if we move on to the next page on the cash flow development, typically our cash flow is generated during the last quarter, most of it, and that is related to the seasonality of the business. However, this year, due to the pandemic, we have seen somewhat a different pattern in the cash flow, especially related to working capital development, mostly related to our own actions that we have been implementing during the year. But this is mostly a question of timing differences and thus expected to be evening out as we move along. Then if we take a look at on the next page, where you see our balance sheet structure, or rather the net debt and equity ratio and net gearing development for the past couple of years and the most recent quarters, we have a very solid balance sheet. As you can see from the numbers, there are some changes which took place in the beginning of 2019 related certain accounting practices, and that is a little bit affecting the comparability of the numbers. But as you can see, for instance, comparing Q3 2019 and Q3 this year, which are fully comparable to each other, so the development has been positive in that respect. Then if we move on to the next slide, here we have listed our strategic priorities. These have been in place since spring 2018. We have a little bit fine-tuned some of the wording, but the essence of the priorities remains the same. Growing business, we have mentioned one of our key priorities on this slide here. It's the development of digital capabilities. As I mentioned already earlier during this call, digital acceleration is a key fact around us right now, and we have already for quite some time been working on improving our digital capabilities. That will continue. And from the consumer's point of view, obviously the consumer shouldn't be noticing necessarily what we are doing behind the scenes, and each of the brands, it's utmost important that from the consumer's point of view, we are presenting our brands as respecting the brand essence and the brand heritage, and offering the brand experience in full to the consumer. And that is something we want to cherish and nurture when presenting our brands to the consumer. And each of the brands have their own personality, so to speak. But whatever we do behind the scenes, the more efficient, the better we can be in our processes, the better the experience will be for the consumer as well. So that's an area where we have been focusing heavily in the past few years, and it definitely is high on our agenda going forward as well. About growing business, I would also like to mention a couple of regional priorities that we have. China is a priority for us, and for instance, in our Q3 report, we were commenting that we have been able to generate good growth there. The baseline obviously is or has been still fairly small compared to the overall size of the business, but we are very happy to see the potential in China. We are there working mostly now with the Wedgwood brand. We have been opening a few physical locations, but China, all in all, as we all know, it's a lot about being able to succeed with e-commerce. So China is a key geographic priority for us. The other geographic priority that I would like to highlight here is DACH region in Central Europe. So there we also have been able to expand our distribution. It's something that's been going on for a while. We first did some rationalizations on how we operate with our business model in central parts of Europe, and now we have more presence there in several countries, Germany obviously being the most important one in this respect. And as we have explained throughout Q2 and Q3 this year, that success is one of the factors that has positively impacted our net sales this year. This type of branding business, it's always about people and being able to inspire the people, being our own organization, being our consumers, being our customers globally. That is one of our priorities as well. And employee experience, for instance, and employee well-being in times like this when people are mostly working remotely. We have been all heavily impacted by the pandemic situation in all of the markets where we operate. From the people's point of view as well, it's extremely critical that we focus well on this one too. Exciting consumers, it's been one of our priorities and remains to be one of our priorities as well. Being able to launch new business models, being able to introduce something different to the market, that is very critical for us. And I'm happy to, for instance, note that one of our most recent business models, vintage business, which we started in Finland a while ago, we have now been broadening the offering to for instance, to Sweden and to some other brands. And this is an example where we have been able to bring something new to the market. We have also been piloting with subscription type of models. And also from the consumer's point of view, sustainability is becoming more and more important. And for us in Fiskars, it's actually a very natural part of our own DNA. And we have been working on that one for quite a long time. But we have also this year launched new sustainability targets as well. And that is very important for one could say, especially for the younger generation of consumers, and something which is part of our key message to the audience today. Sustainability can be many different type of things. It can be new business models. It can be better use of materials or more efficient use of materials. It can be improvements in our supply chain footprint. But it's also about bringing in novelties to the market. So for instance, this year we have been bringing to the market certain products where we have been using either fully recycled materials or most of the materials are recycled. And being better on that front is one of our priorities going forward as well. The last strategic priority here, improving performance. Very important for all of the companies, but as said, we have 2 transformation programs going on right now, and those obviously are related to the performance improvement as well. Then if we move on to the next slide and take a look at our outlook for this year and long-term financial targets, we brought back our outlook for 2020 in mid-October. As many other companies, during the pandemic, we didn't have an outlook for this year, but now the outlook is that we are expecting our comparable EBITDA to increase from the previous year, so from 2019. In terms of the long-term financial targets, these we brought into the discussion in 2017. That was actually more than 100 years after Fiskars started as a listed company, so one could say it was about time to talk about these long-term financial targets as well. And I said this date back to 2017, except for the profitability target, which we revisited in November 2 years ago. Our EBITDA margin target is to reach 12%. The previous target was to exceed 10%. So we have a growth target, which is a combination of organic growth and selected targeted acquisition. So it's not an annual target, it's an over time target. Generally thinking about the 5% target here, the categories that we work with globally, depending a little bit on the category, depending on the region, the annual growth tends to be low single-digit target. So therefore, this 5% is expected to be a combination of organic growth and targeted acquisitions. The capital structure, net gearing is well below 100, as you were able to see on the material. And then we also have a target for the dividend distribution. And if we move on to the next page, there you see how the dividend has developed in the past years. There's obviously one key change here. So in 2019, we distributed the Wärtsilä shares as dividend, and thereafter the baseline has changed due to the fact that we no longer ourselves receive dividends from Wärtsilä. So this is Fiskars in a nutshell, and happy to answer a few questions should there be.
Thank you very much, Sari. So let's go into a few questions. And first of all, you talked a bit about the sort of Central Europe expansion within Terra. Can you tell us a bit more about the competitive landscape here and how that differs from the US, where you've been able to keep your market shares very high?
Yes, so our expansion or expanding the distribution in Central Europe, it's about two things. First of all, we have introduced the watering category to Europe during the past couple of years. Watering was present in our business already in the Northern American region, but now we have the watering products available in Europe as well, in the Nordics, and also now more recently in the Central Europe. So changing the offering, making it more broader has been one way to increase the distribution. And then all in all, we have been better in being able to get more shelf space, have more products available to the consumer in those countries as well. So it's a combination of plenty of things, and these type of things never happen overnight. It has taken a lot of work from the team, but now we are seeing the results as well.
Thank you. So moving on a bit into the Vita segment, and I know you've talked about this a bit during the presentation as well. But the sort of end market here has been rough for a few years, and that's of course true for the whole market. Can you tell us a bit more about the actions and the transformation programs that are connected to it in order to sort of turn this trend?
Yes. So indeed, we launched the Vita transformation, or it was at that point called the Living Transformation Program a couple of years ago. We have done already a lot of actions. The program is still ongoing. As you know, we have revisited, first of all, internally the organization, how we work. We have taken steps in our supply chain, for instance, in Indonesia and Slovenia. But then even I would say more importantly, it's about making sure that you are present in the right places and in the right channels. On purpose, we have, for instance, been exiting some channels, especially in the US, where we see that they are not necessarily the ones where we want to be present with our brands. Bringing new types of business models into it, and further, especially then developing our own capabilities and competencies on the digital front. They are very key. There are also actions like, for instance, in Japan, where we took over one of our brands from a partner. So in a way, consolidating more brands into our own hands in some of the markets. We have also been broadening the brand offering. For instance, in Australia, we have brought to the market a few other brands which were not present in Australia earlier. And these are just some of the examples that what we have been doing and are still doing.
Wonderful. So moving on to the Terra and Crea business, which have seen very impressive numbers during the year. How do you think the pandemic has affected the long-term demand for your offering there?
That is very difficult to say, and I don't think anybody yet has the answer. And there certainly is, to some extent, something which is related to the pandemic and to this year. We have seen that the trade has seen that, some of our competitors have seen that as well. On the other hand, it will be very interesting going forward to see that whether there is something, one could say, more than pandemic here. We have already seen also on the crafting side, for instance, for quite some time, that there is a growing trend that people want to do something with their hands. That is related to the gardening products as well. So it will be something extremely interesting going forward to see how this is shaping up. Still, a few years ago, there were discussions about, for instance, that this gardening getting a smaller share of people's times. On the other hand, we see, for instance, in Asia, where people don't necessarily have big front or backyards, as we might see in some other markets, urban gardening is very interesting for many of our consumer groups. People are paying attention to even their smaller gardens, and there are plenty of opportunities to improve on that front as well.
Wonderful, thank you very much. With that, our time is up. We thank you, Sari, for your presentation and everybody for listening in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.